the judge said, you're trying to argue that you have a government interest in a policy of deterrence by death.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in Massachusetts.
And they said that that's horrific. And I thought that was really powerful, because it wasn't about, we can't consider harms on third parties. It was saying, you're trying to tell me, government, that you have an interest in people dying of dehydration.
As the heavy-handed tactics of the Trump administration and ICE continue to make shocking headlines, one of the most unexpected groups to be impacted is faith leaders and their congregations. This and other assaults on religious freedom, including no longer considering church property as safe sanctuary from ICE raids, are laid out in detail in a new report from the Law, Rights, and Religion Project at Union Seminary titled Religious Liberty and Immigration, Legal Analysis of Past and Future Claims. This week, I will talk to project director and report author Elizabeth Reiner Platt. We need these voices to be heard now more than ever. Make sure you subscribe, share, and rate The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Our library of past conversations includes well over 100 hopeful, empowering, and inspiring interviews with guests like Bishop Marion Budde, Representative Jasmine Crockett, Imam Abdullah Antepli, Rob Reiner, and many, many others. You can help grow The State of Belief with a financial contribution today. Find out how at stateofbelief.com, and you can support and join the work of Interfaith Alliance at interfaithalliance.org. I want to talk to you about a new directive from the Trump White House, which is around federal employees who are being, I would say by this directive, almost encouraged to proselytize in the workplace. This is in government workplace. And what they're saying is you are free to talk about your religion, share your religion, try to convince your coworkers of your religion in the federal workplace. And this includes, by the way, a manager can do that with their reports. And I guess, I think, again, like on your own time, talking about what matters to you, of course you should do that. In the workplace, if someone is constantly saying, yeah, I really believe in my religion, and my religion is the best, and everybody else, I'm sorry, I really believe everybody else is going to hell, and I believe that certain people are going to heaven, and other people, just by the fact of who they are not going to heaven, and I believe, you can imagine like, God, like what kind of environment this is creating. And by the way, the Trump administration, everybody who's putting this forward, in their mind, the only people who are really going to be doing this are their people. White evangelical Christians who are going to be like, proselytizing and sharing and spreading their version of Christianity. It doesn't work that way. So really, it means that anybody can do this. And, one of the groups that has been very effective in using religious freedom to their advantage is like, groups like the Church of Satan, who are like, oh, okay, if everybody can do this, then we're going to show up. Like when the chaplains bill happened in Texas, they were like, we have chaplains. We can volunteer in public schools. I just think, there's this effort by this administration to promote a certain kind of religion as normative. Here's the thing. You can already practice your religion in federal workspaces. You can pray when you want to. You can live out your faith. The idea that they put out a directive about it's okay to basically proselytize, it just crosses a line for me about like creating a workspace where everybody really feels welcome. And so it's just another example. It's another step towards, using religion as something that potentially will divide us rather than unite us. And, that federal spaces, including, people who have supervision over other people, are able to promote their religion. And what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? I mean, you can say no, thank you, but then you've said no to your boss. I don't know. Anyway, I thought you all should be aware of it. If you weren't, it's another example of bad behavior by this administration, a bad idea, bad for democracy, bad for religion. I'll link to the article on stateofbelief.com. You can check it out for yourself. And interested to hear what you have to say, reach out to me on social media. Before I introduce our guest, I wanted to make sure everybody was aware that we have an incredibly exciting webinar gathering happening. It is on Monday, August 11th from 1 to 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. It is called Brick by Brick: How Trump and SCOTUS Are Dismantling Church-State Separation. One of the guests will be Skye Perryman, who we have had many times on this show, who's the president of Democracy Forward. Another one of the guests will be our guest today, Elizabeth Reiner Platt. So please go to interfaithalliance.org. You'll see a sign up there. Again, Monday, August 11th from 1 to 2:15 p.m., Brick by Brick: How Trump and SCOTUS Are Dismantling Church-State Separation. And now to my guest. Elizabeth Reiner Platt has been leading the Law, Rights, and Religion Project since 2015. Her publications have included the report Whose Faith Matters? The Fight for Religious Liberty Beyond the Christian Right. What a good title! Which is just incredibly relevant today. As we know, Liz is a legally trained scholar and advocate who leads efforts to reframe religious liberty in the United States, especially in relations to gender justice, reproductive rights, and racial equity. Just last month, the Law, Rights, and Religion Project moved from Columbia Law School to Union Theological Seminary in New York, my alma mater, and this week it published the latest comprehensive report titled Religious Liberty and Immigration: Legal Analysis of Past and Future Claims. If you have heard Elizabeth Reiner Platt on our show before, you know how good she is at humanizing complex policy and legal abstractions, and that's going to come in useful today as we look at this urgent topic area. So Liz, welcome back to the State of Belief.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be back.
This is exciting. It's exciting, for all the wrong reasons in some ways, that you're putting out this incredibly important report right now, Religious Liberty and Immigration: Legal Analysis of Past and Future Claims. I have to tell you, we're all going insane right now with what we're seeing all across the board about immigration in this country. And it's just disgusting. And for me, I'll just, sorry, I know I shouldn't start out with a rant, but I'm going to start out with a rant.
Go for it.
As a pastor and as someone who's just cares about our society and cares about people, seeing these masked men abducting individuals, it's terrifying. And so anyway, what you've offered here in this report that I really want everyone to know about and to feel like they can access is an accessible understanding of the legal aspects of what is happening right now. And it's a resource for the lay people like most of us, but also for lawyers and faith leaders and others. So let me just say, first of all, thank you for all the hard work this represents. And maybe we can just start out with your own understanding of the landscape into which this report is dropping.
Absolutely. So the report, it really is about the ways in which, despite the administration's rhetoric on religious liberty, its activities in the immigration sphere are really attacking people of faith and communities of faith. You know this well with the work you do starting on day one of the Trump administration, the revocation of the sensitive locations policy that for 30 years said, very basic protection. You can't do ICE enforcement inside or right outside of a house of worship or a religious ritual, protecting people's right to feel safe practicing their faith. to his attacks on Bishop Marion Budde for her, very, modest plea for
Can we say how modest that was? I mean,
right.
it wasn't uncourageous. It was important, but it wasn't like she was being some sort of crazy, unhinged radical.
Sure.
She was actually just preaching what most would call the Christian gospel. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt your flow, but
No,
yes, yeah,
absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, and another thing that you've worked on at Interfaith Alliance, the letters that nonprofit organizations have
yes.
received demanding, information and documents about anything that they've ever done related to immigration, to picking up, and abducting, as you said, people on church property. Arresting religious refugees, including Christians from Iran, arresting faith leaders. It's horrific.
It's shocking, and here's the other really interesting piece of this is going after, literally in the first couple of weeks, going after the Catholic bishops, saying they were padding their bottom line just for the stuff that they've been doing since the beginning, which is caring for refugees and immigrants. This is not like new activity, but it's really interesting for J.D. Vance, who apparently is more Catholic than the Pope, to tell the Catholic bishops that they're money laundering, that they're padding their bottom line by doing this, the work that they're carrying out. It's religious freedom work, which is doing their work. And so I appreciate so much the way you're framing this. All of that should be under the rubric of religious freedom that is being abrogated by this administration.
Absolutely. And, faith communities have, of course, long been a huge part of the movement for immigration justice, going back to, I mean, before this, but, notably in recent history, the sanctuary movement of the 1980s, in which congregations worked with secular activists across the country to protect refugees coming to the U.S. from El Salvador, were prosecuted for those activities. And so,
even before that, HIAS. Let's just talk about, so people, for those who are listeners who don't know, HIAS, it was started by Jewish organizations trying to bring persecuted Jews from around the world to America. It's a refugee policy. In more recent years, it's been incredibly important in bringing people of all faith traditions to the United States. It's completely broadened and to all faith traditions. And HIAS, as you mentioned, is one of those groups that has been attacked specifically by the administration, targeted for its work. A Jewish-led organization targeted for its immigration work.
Absolutely. So what the report, tries to do is tell just a small piece of that history, but also really talk about how, in addition to the ways that religious communities have always shown up for immigrant justice, through the power of the pulpit, through legislative advocacy, through doing that kind of, on the ground resourcing, providing legal services, social services for immigrants. In addition to all those things that we've seen for a very long time, there seems to me to be an increase in litigation tactics that rely on the expansive right to religious liberty that has been created under the Roberts Court, in cases that you've covered, Masterpiece Cakeshop, Catholic Charities.
Right.
Cases,
Well, this is really an important point, is that this court has really just said, okay, well, basically religious, and we talked about this. I think the last time we talked was, I think the cake, was it cake shop?
I think it was Masterpiece Cakeshop. That's
yeah,
right.
The cake shop. And I was just like, well, where does it stop? Like what, and like the idea that basically religious freedom has been so expanded that it's become almost a get out of free card for some things.
Right.
Therein lies the rub. It's like, well, okay, Roberts Court, if you want to really expand the idea of religious freedom, what are we going to start including in that? And whose religious freedom? Is it only this thin slice of radical Christian right that we're talking about? Or is it really everybody's religious freedom to live out the mandates of their faith? And so I think that's a really important point, because the landscape technically should be favorable to this, even if the administration is resistant to it.
Right. And, I think it's a hard line to walk between, I don't want to be Pollyannish and say that claim claimants advocating for religious freedom from, a claimant who says that deportation would violate their religious right to be part of their faith community, for example. I don't want to be overly optimistic about how those cases might fare in court, but I also don't want to be under optimistic, right? I think.
Well, we don't want to leave tools on the table, is what I think what you're saying. That's really, okay, if this is the reality, if you've said these tools are available to us, we're going to employ those tools.
Exactly.
And I think that, and the test will be how and this is, of course, me pretending to be a lawyer because I have a lot of lawyers in my family, but how consistent will you apply the law? Like if you say religious freedom, is that a fair, part of what we're getting at here?
That's right. I think some of it is just a commitment to saying, if nothing else, these laws, religious freedom, should be applied neutrally to everyone.
Right.
And it could be applied broadly, it could be applied narrowly, but we can't treat only some people as legitimately religious. Right. And so I think that's a part of it. But I also think, there are success stories here. So, and there have been a couple really interesting and to some people, I would say unexpected wins recently in religious right to abortion litigation, for example. But in the immigration context, we highlight the case of several volunteers during the first Trump administration, volunteers with the organization No More Deaths in Arizona, who were arrested for leaving water in the desert for migrants to try to prevent people from dying from dehydration. They were arrested for those activities, and they successfully brought a religious liberty defense. So, again, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish, but I also think some of these claims do have legs.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about. There has been litigation since this, I almost called it Trump 2.0, which sounds a little too cutesy. It's like in this recent horror show that is the Trump administration, the law has been employed in many, ways. And what are some of the ways that you've seen religious liberty efforts that do show up actually in this report? Because I do think sometimes there's so much information coming at us and so much news all the time, and the legal landscape seems just like there's so much effort. So it's helpful to pull out some of the ways that the law has been employed and specifically religious freedom claims has been employed as it relates to immigration.
Sure. So I think one of the topics that's gotten the most press coverage, I'll say, is there are now 4 lawsuits challenging that version of the sensitive locations policy that I mentioned up top. I actually, up until I think the 4th one was filed yesterday, right as we were going to print. And I said, stop the presses. There's no 4. So we didn't.
There's no way to endlessly be current. But yeah, okay, good.
So there are now 4 challenges to that as a violation of religious liberty, saying basically that again, people have the right to go to their house of worship without being afraid of getting arrested. There have been a host of cases on just actually a really incredible range of topics. So there have been 2 challenges that I know of saying that this horrific practice of holding people in third countries indefinitely violates religious liberty, because as horrible as immigration detention is within the United States, there are theoretically legal protections for religious practice. Those don't exist when you're being held in a third country.
Right.
So we've seen those challenges.
Yeah. Let me just go back quickly to the sensitive spaces, because I think this is really also interesting in some of the litigants, one of the first cases that was filed with Democracy Forward included the Cooperative Baptists, who along with the Sikh Coalition and the Friends, Quakers, they had never done anything like that before. But they realized that, this is their people. This is their people. These are their, if you actually believe that you're a pastor, if you actually believe that you're caring for a flock, these are your people who are being picked off by masked men and abducted, and it is, it is a terrible, chilling effect on the practice of religion, because people won't show up for faith. They won't show up to worship, and they also it also is just really a direct attack on the people that many of the, these are not super liberal organizations.
Right.
These are religious organizations that feel they have a religious mandate, which is, it allows you, but it also demands that you care for these people. And I just want to make sure that sinks into our listeners, that there are legal things at play here, and underneath those legal things, and when we talk about religious freedom, those are commandments, and in some ways they are, for Christians, in my tradition, it's described differently in other traditions, but in my tradition, if you're welcoming the stranger, you're actually welcoming Jesus. This is not this isn't a peripheral idea. This is a central idea to what it means to actually be a Christian. And so, sorry to interrupt, but I do think it's important when you talk about sensitive spaces in the 4 lawsuits. That's a really important thing, because gets to the core of what it means to have the ability to practice religion.
Absolutely. And, I think it's those cases they talk about the violation of the religious liberty rights of the house of worship, the kind of corporation itself, and saying we are forced to choose between our commitment to being open and welcoming everyone and our commitment to keeping our congregations safe. We can either turn people away and close our doors and say you're not allowed, or we can put people at risk.
Yeah.
So it talks about the religious right of the house of worship, but it also talks about the religious right of the congregants themselves, the immigrant congregants, who again are being their own personal religious faith is being chilled. I'll say, and you mentioned these are not, extremely liberal, congregations. I'll note that 2 dioceses of the Catholic Church issued statements basically telling immigrant congregants that they don't have to go to Mass.
Which is such a radical. It shows you the radicality of the situation. This is not normal.
Right.
This is not okay. Up next, much more with Elizabeth Reiner Platt. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. My guest is Elizabeth Reiner Platt, Director of the Law, Rights, and Religion Project at Union Seminary. I'm so grateful that you're putting out this report. I'm gonna name it "Religious Liberty and Immigration: Legal Analysis of Past and Future Claims," because it's being put out into a moment that is, I would say, a crisis for American legal community, religious community, and self-understanding of what it means. And so the sensitive spaces, and then also the right to being able to practice your religion when you're incarcerated is, of course, completely gone when you're in a gulag in El Salvador.
Right.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And I mean, not to mention all your other rights. I mean, religion just being one of them. But so there were claims related to land use with Trump's efforts to build a border wall across the southern border and across, again, certain religious spaces, including a Catholic diocese, La Lomita Chapel in Texas, and a sacred Native American site as well. So there were 2 cases we highlight there. Again, cases of people of faith being charged with harboring under the both federal and state harboring laws, just for their efforts to, prevent people from dying in the
Yeah.
desert,
Yeah.
leaving food, letting people, cooking for people, giving someone a place to spend the night.
When people talk about, oh, I wish religious folks would do like good for the community, that's what this is all about. You know what I mean? And yet it's being attacked, it's being penalized. I don't know if you get into this because it may not directly apply, but for those of us who were watching what was happening in LA and watching, there was a lot of religion activity. I don't know if you noticed. I'm sure you noticed that, but like there were lines of religious leaders standing up. They were kind of putting themselves in between the police and National Guard and Marines or whatever, and the people. There was also an incident of a ICE stepping onto a church's parking lot and being located there, and there was this pastor who was just like, you can't be here. You are on private land. You are on my church's land, and I say you cannot be here. How does that kind of, those may not immediately be litigatable, but it feels important as far as like our abilities to show up and to say what we need to say as faith leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that kind of situation goes at the heart of the claims that they're making in the sensitive locations policy. So now
Uh-huh.
it is litigatable. The church communities and the religious communities I'm talking to, like you said, they're terrified.
Right.
They're terrified of that. I've gotten questions: can we keep opening our soup kitchen?
Right.
Can we keep uh, providing ESL classes? It's yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
it's
mean, and they're worried because it looks like they're fostering religious. They're fostering immigration. Well, positive immigration locations for people who want to learn English and want to actually do well in this country. And yeah, it really is. It's really outrageous. One of the things that's come up lately is our clergy themselves being arrested. I don't know if you've seen any of those cases, and what it means to have clergy start to be targeted, and whether it's the chaplain in Cincinnati or other faith leaders who are kind of are all of a sudden being either hauled off or being interrogated. I don't. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, I mean, so the Chaplin case, I think you're referring to. Yeah, so I mean, there are kind of a couple claim, to lean into being a lawyer and to kind of
No,
put this
please do.
claim for you. Like that makes me think of a couple different kinds of cases that we outline in the report, and one of them are incidents of people, both citizens and non-citizens, who were specifically targeted by the administration, again in its first term, because of their faith-based activities. So one of them is there was a case by four women who lived in sanctuary churches. These are four undocumented women who were leaders in the new sanctuary movement and themselves had taken sanctuary to protect themselves and their families. And they were hit with outrageous civil fines for essentially failure to self-deport. And the claim they made was we were specifically targeted because of our faith-based activities. And this is actually intentionally trying to chill our religious exercise. Now, there wasn't there wasn't a decision in that case because thankfully the civil fines were dropped with the change of the administration. But there was a second case that won, which was the case of Reverend Kaji Dosa. She is a pastor who's worked closely with the New Sanctuary Coalition in New York, has traveled to Mexico several times to provide to minister and to provide marriage ceremonies for migrants waiting to go into the U.S. And she was specifically targeted by the administration. The administration actually sent an email to the government of Mexico saying, don't let this person back in if she tries to enter Mexico again. She argued that, again, this violated her religious liberty rights, and she won.
Yeah.
So I think that those cases come to mind saying that, we have a religious right to practice our faith without being intentionally targeted. But there have also been a handful of really interesting claims, none of which we've had decisions in. So, it's hard to kind of an open question how far they could go. But basically saying that deportation itself is a violation of certain people's right to religious liberty. So, for example, there was a Seventh-day Adventist man whose wife and children made a claim that our religious beliefs believe in family unity with the man as the spiritual head of the household, and that deportation of him of their father and husband would actually violate their religious liberty rights. So those are kind of two different ways, either the targeting or just saying like I actually have a religious right to stay in my religious community in the United States. And, we'll just have to kind of see where those kinds of claims go.
This is all so important. I want to invite you to offer a reflection on more broadly on how you understand religious freedom now in America. Because what we're talking about is kind of saying, okay, religious freedom claims have just radically expanded, and we're going to say, okay, there's consequences to that, meaning we're going to invite ourselves into that. But what are we seeing? I just find what is this the use of religion by this administration is so toxic to me. And the idea of, okay, we have an anti-Christian bias now, task force that's going to go in, and anybody who says anything against any, and it's like the, kind of the worst kind of, religious proselytizer who's using their faith to say, I don't want to serve the LGBTQ people or whatever. That's really, what they're talking about. They can use this religious freedom card, and they can say, well, we're allowed to do this. And I just wonder, in the end, it's tricky because, we want people to have free exercise. We want people to feel free to practice their religion. But often there is someone at the receiving end of this, and the consequence of someone saying, oh, well, I don't have to serve you because of my religion. I don't have to be involved with you because of my religion. I mean, let's remember, the prohibitions against intermarriage and and the segregation of lunch counters. That was all if they would point immediately to the Bible for that. So where are we with religious freedom in America? I know you think about this too much. And so this is I'm phrasing it in such a, dumbed down version, but I am curious.
What a big and important question. So a huge amount of litigation that is taking place right now on religious freedom is being litigated actually not under the Constitution, but under a statute called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And what that statute says is that you have a right to a religious exemption from an act of the federal government that substantially burdens your sincere exercise of religion, unless the government can show that the burden it's placing on you is necessary to advance compelling government interest. And, each little piece of that test I just laid out can be kind of litigated and argued about. But basically, overall, that test should have room to consider the harms that your requested religious exemption is going to impose on other people. We would hope that the government would, for example, find that there is a compelling government interest that is narrowly tailored to enforcing major anti-discrimination laws on people. That's not how it's always shaken out in courts, but that there should be room in the test that I just laid out to consider harms. And I think we should absolutely consider the harms that requested religious exemptions, across the theological and political spectrums might impose on third parties. But I think the reality is that most of these claims, giving water to people crossing the desert doesn't impose any of the kinds of horrible harms that we're seeing in some of these other cases. And actually, there's a really powerful decision in one of those no more deaths cases where the government tried to argue, oh, no, no, we have to prosecute these people because, we have this compelling interest in protecting the border, everything you might imagine, right? And the court, the judge said, you're trying to argue that you have a government interest in a policy of deterrence by death. That was the court's words.
Wow.
And they said that that's horrific. And I thought that was really powerful because it wasn't about, we can't consider harms on third parties. It was saying, you're trying to tell me, government, that you have an interest in people dying of dehydration.
Yeah,
So
that's powerful. Yeah. I mean, you've really laid it out clearly. And as you said, each one of those words, like I've heard the question of sincerely held beliefs, that's also like, okay, who gets to say this is sincerely held? So how does, again, how does all of this talk about religious freedom and rights intersect with a government that is, by extension, an effort at promoting a certain kind of white Christian nationalism? Like,
yeah.
you and I have talked about these kind of issues before, but you and I have not talked since this administration took power. And I do think it is shocking the level of I don't know. It's not lack of awareness. It's a very aware intention. But I use the phrase, "This is the most anti-religious administration we've seen in years," because any religion that is not in lockstep with their political aims is suspect. And the only ones who are given this freedom to their religion are those who are viewed as allies of the administration. And so it undermines the very idea of religious freedom as a concept that is embedded in the First Amendment and something that we should all be grateful for, because I am grateful for it. But the way I see religion wielded by this administration has been horrific. I mean, you're also in the center of it, really looking at the legal aspect of it. And I mean, you must your jaw must be on the floor as well.
I mean, it's horrible, and it's also been a very long process. One thing I think a lot about is, the Trump administration obviously wields an enormous amount of power, but they also have an enormous infrastructure and base of this Christian conservative legal movement that has been working for a very long time. I think a lot about resources, and I think a lot about the long game. And one of the things that I think our center was founded to do, and that we try to do, is, if you are one of these folks who's trying to find a lawyer to say, I have a religious right as a teacher to misgender my students, you're going to find it very easy to find a big, well-funded law firm to represent your case. If you are someone who's saying, I have a religious right to help migrants, to welcome the stranger, there isn't that host of, that enormous legal infrastructure to help you. And so we really, we're a very small shop, but we try to be very practical in creating legal tools on a very complicated area of the law for faith groups that aren't going to be welcomed by, just to name it, Alliance Defending Freedom and the other big Christian right legal players.
I am so glad you brought this up, and you're absolutely right. Long game, resources, this has been built. I mean, it has been built. The Roberts Court has been built. It did not come out of nothing. It came out of an intention. It came out of massive amounts of investment, and a long game, like a plan. When did it's Alliance Defending Freedom? Is that their euphemism? When were they founded? Do you know, is it like 30 years?
I believe it's 1993.
That's
I
so
think it was
interesting.
shortly after.
This is also like right, when Ralph Reed, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell. I mean, that's actually exactly when we were founded at Interfaith Alliance. In some ways, recognizing the moment, not as a legal organization, but this was like they were kind of like, okay, how are we going to make sure that legally we get what we want, and what they want is not what the American people want, but it is what a thin slice of the American people are getting power and the ability to wield religion. And it's very frustrating because I actually think when you put across the broad understanding of what religious freedom can be, most people get it and they want it. But what they don't like is this idea of I get to invade your public school. Right. I find like that is just the craziest thing for me. Like, I'm not sure that you all do as much in that area, but the whole encroachment of religion into public schools and kind of dictating a religious like norm to the rest of the religious community and saying, oh no, it's just that's just cultural. America was built on that. No. And I'm mystified as as a pastor and as a parent of kids in public school. Like, you really want some random person interpreting the Ten Commandments? All right, let's have the teacher who goes through and says, as an exercise today, kids, we have the 10 Commandments on our wall. Let's go through and see all the ones that Donald Trump has broken. That could be, that could be an exercise. Like they're not assured to get what they want when they put these things. Like, how do you think of religious liberty and in terms of this battle over public schools?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the Mahmoud decision, which I'm sure you've already talked about. Yeah. Which is this case that just came down that said basically that public school teachers are now going to have to predict what materials some parent of one of their classmates are going to find contrary to their religious beliefs and affirmatively provide an opt-out. It's not possible to follow. It's simply not possible to follow. And I don't think it was really intended to actually be followed for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it was intended to do what the justices wanted in this case, which is basically to chill any mention of LGBTQ people in the classroom. But they're creating these doctrines that simply can't be followed. And the idea, the opinion said something like, of course, like, how can we expect parents to tolerate, their kids being, exposed to these ideas that go against their religious belief? And it just seemed so absurd to me, as someone, like, I'm a religious minority. You understand that your children are going to be exposed to things that you do not agree with or that don't match your culture. And it's your job as a parent to talk to your children. I mean, I just think of my daughter had an elf on the shelf, in her classroom. It never occurred to me to sue about it.
Yeah.
It's just such a,
yeah. Well, it's also, it's such a, I spoke during arguments. I spoke with my colleague Maggie Siddiqui, and I'm a gay man with kids in public school, and my kids go to school with so many different kinds of people. And I live in New York City. They're surrounded by people who are not like us, and yet I want my kids actually to know people who are not like us. Not because I want them to be something else. It's because I want them to understand that living in a neighborhood that is diverse, whether that's an immediate neighborhood or a country as a neighborhood, involves being with people who are different from you.
Right.
And understanding that that's just going to exist. And I'm sorry, you can't just say, okay, this is an effort. Like, if they were truly, they would say they would say what it is, which is an effort to erase LGBTQ people from existence, and have only stories that have certain kinds of, you could next say, I don't want any stories that don't have two parents,
Right.
heterosexual parents. But if you look at like Goodnight Moon, it's just a grandma with a bunny. I'm like, I object. Where are the parents? Is supervised. So I just feel like it's so sad. It's really so sad because the idea that we can't be around people who are different from us and we can't learn. Like, I want my kids to learn about other people. I really do. And I think that, in my school, like there's not a lot of other kids who have gay parents, but they don't feel bad. And like occasionally maybe there's a gay character in somewhere, but they also don't even talk about that. There's not, it just is, it doesn't have to be a major deal. Someone made it a major deal. And I really think it comes back to this law machine that has created, I think behind all of this is, the Alliance Defending Freedom or whatever they are, is really pushing this idea. And so they're, it just felt so sad to me. And my husband was like, well, maybe we need to go to private school. And I was just like, that's so sad that we have to abandon public school because someone has decided to try to erase us from, our family from existence. And if you look at the stories that are there, it's not like, and here are some gay parents and you should, really respect everyone and even like accept them. And it's just they're not even the topic of the story. There's another moral, and they just happen to be incidentally same gendered. Anyway, there's a lot of sad examples, and it's all by intention. But there are great people like you and the Law, Rights, and Religion Project that are keeping our spirits up and our hope alive. You have a new report, Religious Liberty and Immigration, Legal Analysis of Past and Future Claims. It's available. If you're a layperson, you can understand it. If you're a law person, also known as lawyers, you can also understand it. If you're a faith leader or from a faith community, you can understand it. It's a really valuable and readable resource. Okay, let me just ask what I'm asking everybody, because Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, whom has been on the show, she said, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And I think that's such an important idea. If there's one thing that you would hope that a listener of this program might do as part of their sense of like democracy work or faith work or whatever, what would you love for them to do or be aware of or have in their minds?
Very good question. One thing I think it's a small thing, but I always like to encourage people to just take a beat when they hear the term religious liberty in a news article, in a law, in a politician's speech, and just say, what is this person talking about really? A religious liberty right to do what? A religious liberty right for who? Because I think one of the ways that we've gotten here is that we've been listening to just the loudest voice in the room on religious liberty, and that's not actually what they want. They don't actually want religious liberty for everyone often. So it's just it's not the only thing that I think people should be doing, but I think it's a small thing, is just think a little bit more critically about how that term is wielded and about what it should mean and who it should protect and how.
I love that. Elizabeth Reiner Platt has been leading the Law, Rights, and Religion Project since 2015. She has just released a new report, which is so important, Religious Liberty and Immigration, Legal Analysis of Past and Future Claims. Liz, thank you so much for joining me on The State of Belief. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Same, and thank you so much for having me.
Who do you know who would get a lot out of this discussion about the law and immigration? Please share The State of Belief with them, and be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Please consider making a financial contribution today at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.